Lay down a list of what is wrong, things you told them all along. Pray to God he hears you, and pray to God he hears you. And where did I go wrong? I lost a friend somewhere along in the bitterness, and I would have stayed up with you all night.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Backfired, an NBA history podcast about bad teams, bad luck, and bad decisions. My name is Lewis, and today we are going to talk about some of the worst single-game, Game 7 performances of all time. Both individual players and entire teams just absolutely shitting the bed in the heat of the spotlight. There are a few really notable examples of this, of course, and I'll talk about those, but there were some that I'd never heard of at all, and I'm glad to have learned a little bit more about them, especially a few in the early to mid-2000s. These are mostly subjective choices, so if you think I missed one, please let me know. Tweet at me, DM me at Backfired NBA Pod on just about any platform. This is only going to be in Game 7s that the team or player lost, by the way. There are some pretty atrocious performances that I'm going to omit. But before I get into that, I wanted to let you all know that I had what I think is a really, really good idea for something NBA history related that I'm going to spend some time exploring and workshopping. It's not going to come out for quite some time, but just know that there's something you're all going to love in the works. I've run it past a few people and they've all thought that it was as good of an idea as I do. It's fresh, it's new, it's interesting, something that I've wanted to watch or listen to and have searched for, and it seemingly doesn't exist, but I think it should. So like with this podcast and a couple other things I've worked on or am working on right now, because it doesn't exist, I figure, why can't I be the one to do it? So look forward to that. I know it's vague, but soon, within the next couple months, there will be something really, really cool heading your way. And it's going to be great. I'm super excited about it, and I have not shut up about it to my friends and girlfriends since I had the idea. So anyway, let's talk about Game 7s. There are two really notable ones that I'm going to get out of the way at the top just because they've been covered to death and everybody knows about these and remembers these. First off, from just this past playoffs, the Suns versus the Mavericks, a 33-point loss by the Suns. Enough said, but I am going to say more. The Mavs never trailed in this game, absolutely destroyed the Suns in the second quarter, 30-10, led by 30 points at halftime, led by 42 going into the fourth quarter. At one point went on a 17-0 run. And for the 1 seed hosting the 4 seed, you certainly would expect this game to go a little differently. There is, of course, the rumor that the Suns were in the midst of a COVID outbreak at the time, and that certainly would explain their lack of performance. But regardless, Luka Doncic, Jalen Brunson, and Spencer Dinwiddie all combining for 89 points is scary stuff. No surprise that the New York Knicks are much better this year now that they have Jalen Brunson in tow. And the other one, although it's not bad in the final score sense, the 73-win Warriors blowing a 3-1 series lead to the Cavaliers, and everybody on the team except for Draymond Green on the Warriors pretty much having a bad offensive performance. Pretty wild. For those who don't remember, Klay Thompson had 14 points on 6 of 17 shooting, 2 for 10 from 3. Steph Curry, 17 points, 6 of 19 from the field, 4 of 14 from 3. Harrison Barnes was 3 for 10. Andre Iguodala was 2 for 6. While Draymond Green shone with 32 points, 15 rebounds, and 9 assists, including hitting 6 threes. So one of the most bizarro Warriors performances that you'll see, Draymond Green carrying the offense. Yeah, that game was such a rock fight, though. The Cavs didn't have a great offensive performance either, but they won. But now I'll go into a little more detail on each of the other ones, starting with a dishonorable mention because it's definitely the outcome that I think a lot of people expected at the time. But let's jump to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals in 1990. That was the Bulls on the road in Detroit against the defending champions. The Bulls had won Game 6 in Chicago handily to force Game 7, but basically nobody but Michael Jordan made it to Detroit for that game, it seemed. This was a 19-point loss for the Bulls, and although Michael Jordan finished with 31 points, 8 rebounds, and 9 assists, his 31 points ended up being a good chunk of his team's total points for the night. The Pistons won this one 93-74. And here are some notable Bulls offensive performances that night. Scottie Pippen, 1 for 10 shooting in 42 minutes. This was only his third year in the league, but he was an all-star this year for the first time, so, you'd expect a little more out of him. Craig Hodges, who had just won the three-point contest this year and would again for each of the next 2 seasons, 3 for 13 shooting, 2 for 12 from 3. 12 three-point attempts was Hodges' career high in any game, regular season or postseason, and he missed most of them. Horace Grant, this one is astonishing. 3 of 17 from the field, 3 of 15 on 2-pointers. A lot of those, I didn't count exactly how many, but were missed shots around the rim. For somebody who was shooting 55% from the field in the playoffs that year to then go 3 of 17 is horrendous. Bill Cartwright was 3 for 9. B.J. Armstrong 1 for 8. Armstrong and Stacey King, the 2 rookies, were sent into this game at various points, and the Pistons just attacked them over and over and over again, so they were quickly subbed out each time. But it was just not the kind of game that you can throw a rookie into. And despite Jordan's third quarter heroics, where he got the Bulls within striking distance, he was not able to close it out for Chicago. And in total, the Bulls, not including Jordan, shot 15 of 63 from the field. That is less than 25%. While the Pistons, all things considered, played a pretty standard game. Reigning Finals MVP Joe Dumars wasn't great, but it did not end up mattering as the Pistons smashed the Bulls and then smashed the Portland Trail Blazers in 5 games in the finals, the one loss being a 1-point loss in overtime. That, of course, won them their second consecutive NBA title before losing in the playoffs the next year to the eventual champion Chicago Bulls. In 1992, this one also expected, but it was still a massive loss. The New York Knicks, under first year with New York head coach Pat Riley, the Knicks were the 4 seed. They lost by 29 points in Game 7 to the reigning champion Chicago Bulls. The hard-nosed defenders over in New York let Michael Jordan, who was the object of their shoves and elbows and whatnot, let him go for 42 points to completely dominate them. Chicago only led by 5 at halftime, so did most of their damage in the second half. New York only scored 30 points in the second half after putting up 51 in the first. This series was pretty low scoring until Chicago broke through in Game 7, and the Knicks were just outmatched. They usually were when it came to Michael Jordan, so no surprises there. The Knicks lost to the Bulls in 1989, 1991, this year, 92, the next year, 93, defeated them in 1994 en route to a finals matchup with the Houston Rockets. More on that in a little bit. But of course, Michael Jordan was on the Birmingham Barons at the time. And when Jordan returned to basketball for the 95 playoffs, the Knicks did not face them. They fell to their new rival, the Indiana Pacers. And in 96, the Knicks once again lost to Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And the Knicks were one of several teams that Jordan won multiple playoff series against and never lost to, but the Knicks were his most common opponent and clearly his favorite matchup because he kicked their ass a bunch of times. The other teams that Jordan faced multiple times and never lost to, by the way, were Atlanta, Charlotte, Cleveland, Miami, Philadelphia, and Utah. Let's skip ahead now to 2005. It's Game 7 between the Houston Rockets and the Dallas Mavericks. It is the 4-5 matchup between the 58-win Mavericks, who were the 4 seed, and the 51-win Rockets, who were the 5 seed. That is a 7-game gap between the 4 and 5 seed. And it was a little messed up because the Seattle Supersonics had won their division, and at the time that guaranteed a team a top 3 playoff seed, I believe. So the Sonics were actually the 3 seed when nowadays they would have been the 4 seed themselves, winning 52 games that year. So I'll read you the standings in case that's a little confusing. Number 1, Phoenix, 62 wins. Number 2, San Antonio, 59 wins. Number 3, Seattle, 52 wins. Number 4, Dallas, 58 wins. They lost their division to San Antonio by 1 game. Number 5, Houston, 51 wins. Number 6, Sacramento, they won 50 games. Number 7, Denver, 49 wins. And number 8, Memphis, 45 wins. The 44-win Timberwolves just missed the cutoff there. So all things considered, it's a pretty even matchup. Houston is 7 games behind Dallas, but they still won over 50 games themselves. They have 2 bona fide star players in Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady. But if you know anything about Tracy McGrady, you know where this is heading. The Rockets won the first 2 games in Dallas. Dallas took the next 2 games in Houston, and then Game 5 as well to take a 3-2 series lead. But the Rockets forced the Game 7 after dominating the Mavs in Houston in Game 6. But in Game 7, the Mavericks rode an entire team effort to an easy win over Houston. Jason Terry had 31 points. Josh Howard, a future episode topic, had 21 points. Dirk Nowitzki was sick during the game. He had 14 points and 14 rebounds, but he was pretty rough in that entire series. Shot about 30% from the field, 85% from the line. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported that after Game 7, he had an IV inserted, so it was a semi-serious illness that he was playing through. He played much better in the next round, which was a loss to the Phoenix Suns, and his former teammate, the MVP, Steve Nash. One thing I love about this era is that in the newspaper, Dirk Nowitzki was described as having played only 36 minutes in Game 7, and that was a good thing because he got a little bit of rest heading into the next series. So, I yearn personally for the day that Taylor Jenkins lets a few Grizzlies players play over 36 minutes a game. But I think that's going to take Game 7 of the playoffs to happen, much like his sensei of sorts, Mike Budenholzer. But on the Rockets side, their stars Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady combined for 60 points. The rest of the team could only muster 16 as they fell to the Mavs 76 to 116. And yes, that is a 40-point loss. The very same day, May 7th of 2005, there was another big loss, this time the Boston Celtics, the favorites by virtue of them being the 3 seed. They lost in the first round to the Indiana Pacers, who were still kind of reeling from the aftermath of Malice at the Palace. Still missing Ron Artest, of course, who was suspended for the entirety of the season, but they'd returned Steven Jackson, Jermaine O'Neal, Anthony Johnson, and Reggie Miller from their suspensions of varying length. Reggie Miller did get a 1-game suspension, actually. He did enter the stands, but clearly didn't do enough to warrant a long-term suspension. He didn't even play in that game, by the way, the Malice of the Palace game. But on the Celtics side, Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker got very little help. Rafe LaFrentz and Gary Payton combined for 7 points on 3 of 14 shooting, and the Pacers really just had to do a little bit better than playing their worst game of the season to win, and they did, which set up a playoff series between the Pacers and the Pistons, which the Pistons won. Reggie Miller checked out of the game for Indiana for the final time, with the Pacers down a couple possessions with 15 seconds left. If you want to cry this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're listening to this, go ahead and check out the video of Pistons coach Larry Brown, who of course used to be the Pacers coach in the mid-90s, calling a timeout so Reggie Miller could get one last standing ovation from the crowd in Indianapolis. It's a great moment. In 2006, the Lakers and the Suns were facing off, and you really see in this roster why Kobe Bryant had to score 81 points to beat the Raptors earlier in that season. So this is the starting lineup for the Lakers in this playoff series. Kobe Bryant, Lamar Odom, Smush Parker, Luke Walton, who actually was entering the best stretch of his career, and Kwame Brown. Now, obviously, this is not a great starting lineup by any means, but the Lakers, as the 8th seed, held a 3-1 series lead. But this was the 7 seconds or less Suns with the 2-time reigning MVP Steve Nash in the fold. They were not about to bow out in the first round. They dominated the Lakers for the next 3 games, including a 31-point victory in Game 7 to close things out. This Suns team is really, really cool, and I hate that I'm probably going to have to do an episode someday about what happened to them the following year to eliminate them from the playoffs. But in this game, they had a balanced scoring attack from their starting lineup, and 2 other guys who also started at points in this series but came off the bench in Game 7. 7 players scored in double figures: James Jones, Tim Thomas, Steve Nash, Raja Bell, Sean Marion, and Boris Diaw, but the high scorer off the bench was Leandro Barbosa. No Amare Stoudemire this season. He only played 3 regular season games after getting surgery in October of the preseason. They thought that he would be back by February. His rehab took a little longer than expected and wasn't enough, as after his 3rd game, he experienced stiffness in both of his knees, so he was held out for the remainder of the season and the postseason. So a knee issue holding Amare Stoudemire out for that entire year. But this devastating loss for the Lakers was just one of the things that piled up over time that led to Kobe Bryant requesting a trade from the Lakers in 2007, because they also lost again in the next year in the first round to the Suns. But getting Pau Gasol for nothing and winning a title in 2008 made him change his tune. Let's go to 2008. We all know who won the title in 2008. It was the Boston Celtics. They never shut up about it. But they had a surprising challenge in the first round that year. The Atlanta Hawks, who were 37-45. The Celtics, by the way, were 66-16 that year, so a 29-game gap separated these two teams in the regular season. But the Hawks won all 3 of their home games to force a Game 7. And this is a hilarious series to look back at because Boston won all of their home games in blowout fashion, and Atlanta squeaked by in all 3 of their home games. But this series had one notable and quotable moment, and that is when Hawks backup center Zaza Pachulia was handed a microphone after a gritty come-behind win in Game 6.
Nothing easy! Nothing easy! We're going to Game 7, baby! Game 7! Game 7!
Unbeknownst to Zaza at the time, it was going to be extremely easy. The Celtics held Atlanta to 65 points, which is the fewest points a team had ever scored in a Game 7 in NBA history, save for one time, which was 2 years before in 2006. LeBron's Cleveland Cavaliers put up just 61 points against the Detroit Pistons. Atlanta trailed 79-43 heading into the fourth quarter. None of the Celtics played any more than 32 minutes. Talk about getting rest, huh? You know, there's not much else I can say about this. Atlanta did a really good job by forcing that Game 7, and, you know, something for them to be proud of, but I'm sure they'd all like to forget what actually happened in the Game 7. But that was the first in what turned into a 10-year playoff streak for Atlanta under Mike Woodson, Larry Drew, and Mike Budenholzer. I've always thought, without digging too far into things, that since moving to Atlanta, the Hawks have been one of the most boring franchises ever. But they do have a lot of regular season success, which does matter. But let's move on to a team that has not had much success of any sort, and that's the Charlotte Hornets. In 2016, they made the playoffs for the last time in franchise history, maybe ever, who knows? But they won 48 games that year, their most since the year 2000, and they faced off in the first round against the Miami Heat, who still had Dwayne Wade, but had, of course, lost LeBron James in free agency a couple years before, and lost Chris Bosh in the middle of that season to blood clots. Although he would try to gain medical clearance for a couple more years, his career ended abruptly in 2016 when he had to sit out the All-Star game and three-point shooting contest, and later the remainder of the season. But the starting lineup of Dwayne Wade, Hassan Whiteside, Goran Dragic, Joe Johnson, and Luol Deng made for a very fun first-round series against Charlotte, who were led by Kemba Walker, of course. This was a very, very, very fun series, especially games 4 through 6, where the games were really tight. Charlotte actually led 3-2 in this series, but when it came to Game 7, were simply overmatched. The Heat won 106-73. Just a nasty game by the Hornets. Kemba was 3 for 16. Frank Kaminsky was 3 for 15. On the whole, the Hornets shot just 32% from the field. The highlight of this series, though, was Game 6 in Charlotte, where Dwayne Wade went off, and some guy sitting courtside wearing a purple shirt earned himself an apt nickname.
Purple shirt man, have a seat. Mama, there goes that man. But I tell you what, purple shirt man got to sit down, and somebody's got to control him.
Purple shirt man seemingly spurred a 10-point fourth quarter for Dwayne Wade in Game 6, including 2 clutch shots and a block, each with under a minute remaining in the game. But the Heat closed out that one in 7 games before falling to the Toronto Raptors in 7 games in the next series. And this was a crushing defeat of their own. They fell by 27 points in Toronto in Game 7. They kept it close through 3 quarters, but scored just 11 points in the fourth. And the joke from that series and the next one for Toronto was that Bismack Biyombo was just grabbing a ton of rebounds, including 26 rebounds in Game 3 against Cleveland in the Eastern Conference Finals. Some, including me, postulate that this great rebounding performance in the playoffs was what got him a 4-year, $72 million contract during the cap spike in the summer of 2016. And if you want to hear more about horrible contracts given out during that summer, check out episode 10 of this podcast. So that is all I'm going to talk about in terms of entire playoff series, but I am going to briefly mention some notable awful shooting performances in Game 7s before I go. These are also Olean losses, not including the Bulls players in 1990 against Detroit. The Horace Grant one is probably the worst one of these outside of maybe John Starks. John Starks on the Knicks, 2 for 18 in Game 7 against the Houston Rockets in 1994. Jamal Mashburn for the Miami Heat, he shot 3 of 15 in a 1-point loss to the New York Knicks in the year 2000. David Wesley of the New Orleans Hornets in 2004 against Miami shot 1 for 10. Joe Johnson on the Nets, 2 for 14 against Chicago in 2013. Danny Green in Game 7 of the finals, Spurs versus Heat in 2013, 1 for 12 shooting. Terry Rozier, 2 for 14 against Cleveland in 2018. The very next day, Trevor Ariza, 0 for 12 against the Warriors in 42 minutes. This was the game where the Rockets missed 27 threes in a row. Ariza, Harden, and Eric Gordon were the most egregious offenders. Only lost by 9, so, just a little bit less on the variance there, and the Warriors fall to the Rockets. And then finally, Pandemic P, Paul George, 4 for 16 shooting for the Clippers against the Nuggets in the bubble, 2 for 11 from 3. Kawhi Leonard also had a bad game, 6 of 22 shooting. And Doc Rivers, in his final act as the head coach of the Clippers, blows yet another 3-1 series lead. Where did that guy even go to medical school? But anyway, if you think that I miss a particularly bad team or player performance in a Game 7, please let me know via social media at Backfired NBA Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And yeah, look forward to the fruits of my my vague announcement of exciting new content coming soon. I really do think that y'all are going to like it. I'm averaging like 200 listens per episode right now on this pod, which is great. Super cool. I really, really appreciate everybody who listens. And I think that what I'm about to start making soon could have an even wider audience than this if I'm lucky. But, I already am lucky. But that is it for this episode, and we will talk again in a couple weeks. All right, have a good one.
Baby, are you gonna be the one that saves me? And after all, you're my wonder wall.